either very from the perspective of 2023, Dublin in the 1970s can appear comfortably familiar, but also maybe a little strangely strange. Some of the landmarks appear totally unchanged, certainly largely unchanged. Others, I'm afraid, are distant memory. Some icons are thankfully still with us. Others, sadly, not. In the summer of 1974, I was 19, working away diligently in the Central Telegraph office in GPO in Dublin, and doing all of what 19-year-olds do. We break away from what was typically a 70 to 80-hour working week. And the afternoon of Friday, May 17th, wasn't very different to a lot of the others. It was working age. Ran up to the canteen on the top floor of the BPO about 5:15 to get a bit of tea. And I was overtaken in the corridor by a colleague of mine who was rushing down the petrol train to drop that. And up I went and munchily, chatting with friends. And then, wasn't it that just muffled, distant noise, just barely perceptible. And nobody else at the table nobody else knows a very big meal, more than 10 minutes of this one. But somewhere in the deep recesses of my brain, what bomb was that? I've been to Belfast a few times in the early 70s. I haven't been too far away from the EDT bomb, the Stockholm based bomb, previous year. So some explosions wasn't entirely new to me. But in that moment, that sunny afternoon, the airy canteen BPO, the notion that that's just a full of sound which is lapping up against the air. It could be anything, tremendous. So just then about a minute later, boom. People mistake the sound of the bomb. A lot nearer to the things just started to get very surreal. I ran over to the window, overlooking Henry Street on the top floor, and I jumped out the window onto the narrow parapet outside the bungalow apartment. And I ran up that parapet to the junction of Henry Street and the house. And this was in the days after the film had gone, the spire had yet to be built. So I had an uninterrupted bird's-eye view all the way down from it. And the scene that faced me was absolutely inexplicable and stunning. The bomb cloud was still developing over the roofing, and people in their hundreds coming up, roaring, screaming, shouting, totally powerful. And it's strange, but in that moment, in the chaos, there's a wonderful sense of stillness. At that moment, I was absorbed in that stillness. And the sound of the third bomb going off on Leicester Street, it didn't seem that abnormal. The chaotic hadn't quite become normal, but it was no longer entirely. But the sound of that third bomb had the wheels, the rational wheels turning back to the brain. And my internal voice began to say, bombs. In Dublin. Usually standing on top of the building that exemplifies the 1916 rising. Maybe it's time to go back inside. The rest of the evening is a bit of a blur. We began organizing cars in blood bank. In those pre-mobile phone days, keeping lines of communication were absolutely crucial. So guys who had been off actually just spontaneously came in. People who were going off duty actually, would stay. Later that evening, we discovered that another bomb found 37 people, mostly young women, were killed, and over 300 injured that day. Nobody was ever been charged, much less convicted of any responsibility for this atrocity. To this day, it remains the greatest loss of life of any atrocity of the troubles. Passing even that very home alone. The bombs were located on Talbot Street, Arnell Street, and Leicester Street. In Leicester Street, my best friend at the time worked in the office outside which the car bomb had been planted. In fact, thankfully he had that work in Talbot Street, the colleague I had passed in the corridor rushing for a train, the journey took him right past the bomb. This close. Thankfully she was a few minutes. A few minutes gone past it when it exploded. And then in Parnell Street, the pub at which the bomb was planted, where in that single explosion alone, 10 people were killed, including 2 infant carers and their parents. Where my father typically like every Friday evening. But some miracle, this was a religious observance. If you wanted to know where he was Friday evening on the way home from work, you would always stop into this for a pint. Some miracle happened in the day. He wants to live today. But not everyone was that lucky. For years afterwards, I worked with the sister of this man, Jack Flowers, who was killed in Monaghan. The relatives of the dead still don't know the full truth of what happened to their loved ones. The closest they came was the Barnrock fire in 2003. The main headlines from Barron were that the bombings were carried out by 2 groups of loyalist paramilitaries, most of whom were members of the UBF. It is likely that UDR soldiers or UC officers had prepared the attack or were aware of the preparations. Several of the suspects were reliably believed to have had relationships with British intelligence and RUC and special branch officers. The inquiry was and continues to be obstructed by the British authorities and the British government, who refused to show intelligence management to the inquiry. Barron was followed, and finally, the Barron report was highly critical of the Garda investigation of the government of the day, which showed little interest in violence. Can you imagine them? The government which showed little interest in the bombing, killing of Muslim citizens. But that was the truth, that was irrelevant. That is the truth of it. Barron was followed by the McEntee report of 7. And McEntee found further, astonishingly, that huge amounts of relevant documentation have been missing regarding the crimes. Biggest mass murder to occur on this island, and the fire slipped on the back of the radiator. McEntee also found that the investigation, the official Garda investigation into the He found out less than 3 months. God forbid you were mugged on the way home here. Would you expect the investigation to have wound down within 3 months? It's beyond wrong. In the meantime, there is a danger that this atrocity will be airbrushed from our memory. The abomination that is the troubles was often being the stuff of despair for many of us, I'm sure, as we watched both sides devour each other and themselves with steel. I have almost choked with indignation at times, listening to so-called Republicans justifying the slaughter of innocent men and children, supposedly in our name. Think of Patsy Gillespie, the father of three, chained to a van to drive a 1,000-pound bomb into a checkpoint, where his family was held hostage. If you want a horror story, read the Chronicle report. I think of Joanne Matthews, a young mother, 29 years of age, shot in the head at point-blank range by the IRA for the crime of earning a bit of extra money for her family, very life circumstances. I think of Tim Curry, Jonathan Ball, cut to ribbons with a shrapnel of 2 bombs detonated the British shopping centre and solidly after with a warrant. Bombs that were purposely placed in heavy cast iron bins to create the maximum amount of shrapnel and the maximum amount of damage to innocent individuals. We sometimes need to remind ourselves that what we're looking at on TV news every night in Ukraine, it's not just another part of the war. The indiscriminate bombing of civilians is a war crime. The Dublin and Monaghan bombings are no less of an abomination than Warrington, Tolma, Bloody Sunday. We have been denied the truth behind this slaughter on our own doorstep. We cannot allow it to fade from the memory. Justice for the Forgotten, the organisation of the families of the victims, which is funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs, is still campaigning to get the British government to release the documents which show the truth behind this atrocity. They've gone beyond looking for prosecutions. They simply want to know the truth, what it was, and how it left their homes for years. And we, in solidarity, we want nothing less for